If you pull out your driver's license right now and, just look at your last name.
Yeah, especially if it's a really common surname like Garcia or Martinez.
Right, or Torres.
Yeah.
You probably don't think much of it. You might think, well, it just means my ancestors came from somewhere in Spain or, Latin America.
Which is what most people would assume, yeah.
Exactly. But what if I told you that mundane, everyday name might actually be, it could be a highly engineered 500-year-old camouflage.
Oh, it's wild to think about.
Right, like a shield deliberately adopted to hide a direct, unbroken bloodline to ancient Babylonian royalty.
It really flips your whole perspective upside down.
It totally does. Because most of us, we think of our family history as this, fixed black and white photograph of a great-grandparent who immigrated maybe a century ago.
Right, a very localized recent past.
Yeah. But today, we're tearing up that photograph. Welcome to this custom deep dive. I know you want to get the deep knowledge on this without getting bogged down. So our mission today is to take what looks like a standard stack of historical notes.
And pull out this epic 1,000-year story.
Exactly. A story of survival, massive wealth, and hidden identity. We're using this incredible source titled Sons of Life.
Yeah.
From Babylonian kings to Caribbean shores.
And it is just a phenomenal piece of genealogical history.
It really is. We are tracing a lineage past the modern databases, past the Spanish ledgers of Puerto Rico, past the medieval castles of Castile, all the way back to the ancient banks of the Euphrates River.
It's an incredible trajectory because it forces us to completely rethink how historical survival actually works.
How so?
Well, we're trained to view our ancestry in these tiny, isolated fragments, maybe, 3 or 4 generations deep. But the documentation we're exploring today completely shatters that scale.
Right. It's not just a few decades.
No, not at all. It spans entire empires, multiple continents, and frankly, massive geopolitical collapses.
Yeah.
And to understand how this specific bloodline eventually washes up onto the shores of the Caribbean, we first have to establish the immense, and I mean almost unimaginable prestige of where it begins.
And it begins in Babylonia, which, for context, is modern-day Iraq. And the year is around 1085.
Right.
Just to set the global stage for you. The Normans have just conquered England. The First Crusade is still about 10 years away. And right in the middle of this era, a young man named Hiyya al-Dawudi is born.
And Hiyya wasn't just your average religious student.
Oh, definitely not. His family carried a title that commanded absolute, unquestioned reverence across the entire Jewish world. He was Al-Dawudi, which translates to the Davidic.
And that title is the absolute key to understanding their initial power. In 11th century Mesopotamia, Al-Dawudi wasn't a surname the way we use surnames today.
Right, it wasn't just a label.
Exactly. It was a literal functional title of descent. The Jewish community in the Middle East at this time didn't have their own state, but they were governed by what was essentially an exiled monarchy.
Wow.
Yeah, the leaders were called the Exilarchs, or the Resh Galuta. And they claimed an unbroken paternal lineage directly back to the biblical King David.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because as someone who has, dabbled in ancestry websites, the absolute peak of the dream is usually finding out your great-great-grandfather owned, a slightly larger than average farm in the 1800s.
Right, a nice little piece of land.
Exactly. But imagine hitting a genealogical wall and suddenly discovering your direct ancestor was essentially acting as ancient Babylonian royalty.
And it wasn't just a symbolic royalty either. This is where we have to look at the mechanics of medieval power. The Exilarchs weren't just religious figureheads.
What were they actually doing then?
They functioned as a shadow government. The Islamic caliphs recognized them as the official political representatives of all Jews in the empire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they commanded their own taxes, they had their own armies, they held their own royal courts.
That is insane.
So to carry the Al-Dawudi name meant you were walking around with the literal weight and authority of biblical royalty. Plus, Hiyya's father was David, the son of Hezekiah Gowan.
And the geonym, those are the presidents of the great Babylonian academies, right?
Exactly. So Hiyya is born at the exact intersection of royal Davidic blood and supreme intellectual authority.
So he's practically a prince and a scholar combined. He studied at the legendary Yeshivat Gion Yaakov, the Academy of the Pride of Jacob. And he was a polymath. He wasn't just studying theology. He was a master of geometry, a brilliant mathematician, and a composer of piyutim.
Which are liturgical poems.
Right. In fact, his hymns were preserved by scholars like Samuel David Zazzato centuries later, and they're still sung in Sephardic synagogues today. His words are still alive.
It's a lasting legacy.
But then, despite having all this status and comfort in Babylonia, he does something that alters the course of his family line forever. He leaves.
He just packs up.
Yeah, he packs up his scrolls, his mathematical tools, and his royal lineage, and migrates thousands of miles across the Mediterranean to the Iberian Peninsula.
What's fascinating here is the underlying geopolitical shift driving that decision, because Hiyya wasn't just casually moving to a new city because he liked the weather.
Right, it wasn't a vacation.
No, he was actively participating in a massive historic brain drain. If we look at the mechanics of the 11th century, the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East was weakening.
It was fracturing, right? Politically and economically?
Exactly. Meanwhile, the Golden Age of Spain was in full swing, and that acted as a magnet for the brightest minds of the era.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's very similar to how modern tech workers might, flee a collapsing economy to flock to Silicon Valley.
That's a great comparison.
Yeah, and the great medieval historian Abraham Zacuto actually documented this specific migration in his Sefer Yohasan. He noted that Hiyya's move was a highly calculated transfer of intellectual capital.
But traveling thousands of miles is one thing. How does a Babylonian scholar actually survive, let alone rise to power, in a completely foreign, war-torn land?
It wasn't easy.
I mean, when he arrives in Iberia, he's walking right into the middle of the Reconquista. The borders are constantly shifting violently between Christian and Islamic powers. It's total chaos.
It was incredibly chaotic. But from a purely strategic standpoint, that chaos was precisely why someone with Hiyya's specific skill set became so unbelievably valuable.
Because they needed structure.
Yes. The founding king of Portugal, King Afonso I, was actively carving out a brand new Christian kingdom from scratch. And when you conquer new territory, you can't just plant a flag and call it a day.
Right, you have to actually run it.
You desperately need administrative geniuses. You need diplomats who speak multiple languages, who understand advanced mathematics, who can use geometry to map out new agricultural borders.
And who can manage complex task ledgers, which is exactly what Hiyya could do.
He possessed every single one of those skills.
The king clearly recognized that too, because he recruits Hiyya as a high-level advisor and gives him this unbelievable title, Chia Rishon Legelo Portugal.
Which translates to Chia, first in the land of Portugal.
First in the land. He basically becomes a bailiff, an Almojarif, managing the land distribution for the crown.
And being an Almojarif was a position of immense logistical power. He was the one physically deciding how newly conquered, devastated lands were categorized, rehabilitated, taxed, and managed.
Basically figuring out how to actually fund the king's armies.
Exactly.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
Because the sources show he wasn't just managing land for the Portuguese crown. He was somehow managing vast estates for the Crusader Knights Templar in Castile and Leon.
Yeah, that part is wild.
I have to push back here because this makes zero sense on the surface. We have a direct royal descendant of the Jewish Exilarchs managing money and agricultural land for the Christian Crusader Knights Templar.
That sounds totally contradictory.
Right. These are the same crusaders, famous for their religious zealotry and violence. How did he possibly navigate the politics of that without being executed on the spot?
It sounds like a massive contradiction, but it perfectly highlights the functional necessity of neutral intermediaries during medieval border wars.
Okay, neutral intermediaries. What does that look like?
Think of Hiyya as acting like a medieval version of Switzerland. When you have these highly militarized, religiously driven factions constantly butchering each other over territory.
Yeah.
Neither side fully trusts the other with the tedious, crucial work of actual economics. The Knights Templar were warriors. I mean, they weren't accountants.
Right, they knew how to fight, not balance a ledger.
Exactly. They held massive agricultural estates, but they didn't have the administrative capacity to manage crop yields and complex taxation.
So they needed an operating system they could just plug into.
Precisely. Hiyya's value was his objective, neutral competence. His mastery of geometry and law allowed him to transcend those religious and military lines.
Oh.
He was useful to the Templars because he could organize their massive estates efficiently. Turning chaotic, conquered land into reliable funding for their operations, he provided a service they simply couldn't generate internally.
That is brilliant. And he was so respected for this that when he died in 1154, he was buried just outside the walls of a Templar castle in Castile.
A huge sign of respect.
So he essentially builds the administrative backbone of these forming kingdoms. But at the same time, he sets the foundation for his own dynasty.
Yes, the legacy really takes off from there.
His descendants take that administrative foundation and turn it into lasting institutional political power. If we trace the line from Hiyya, we go to his son, Yaish.
And Yaish means life, similar to what Hiyya or chime means in Hebrew.
Right. And Yaish operates as a military leader and scholar during these tense border wars. But the real explosion of power happens with Yaish's son, Hiyya's grandson, a man named Yahya ben Rabbi.
Yahya ben Rabbi is a towering figure in this lineage. If you read the Portuguese chronicles, he is famously remembered as Dom Yahya o Negro, or Yahya the Black.
Right, and we need to clarify the mechanics of that nickname. Because King Afonso, I granted Yahya a massive conquered Moorish estate near the town of Óbidos. And that estate was called Aldea dos Negros, meaning the village of the blacks or the village of the Moors. So Yahya literally became the lord of this village.
Which is why we have to be careful not to view medieval history through a modern lens. The title O Negro wasn't a physical description of Yahya.
It was geographical.
Exactly. Identities and noble titles back then were deeply tied to the geographic restructuring of the land itself. Because he was granted the lordship of the Aldea dos Negros, that geographic label just became his permanent administrative identifier.
But his power went way beyond just holding land. I mean, he was knighted by the Christian king, which is a staggering achievement for a Jewish scholar at the time.
Absolutely unprecedented.
And he held the official crown post of Arrabat-Mor. That translates to the chief rabbi of Portugal. But based on the sources, it sounds like he was acting as a secretary of the treasury, a chief justice, and a religious leader all rolled into one.
The Arrabat-Mor was essentially a top-tier government minister. Let's look at how that actually functioned day to day.
Let's do it.
He was personally responsible for collecting all taxes from the Jewish populations across the entire kingdom. He administered their internal justice system, meaning he was the ultimate judge for civil disputes.
Oh, wow.
And he was the direct, singular representative to the king. It was a role of supreme bureaucratic and cultural power.
This is also the exact moment where the family name solidifies into something iconic. They rebrand, in a way, becoming known as the Aben Yahya family.
Yes. Ibn meaning son of, and Yahya being the Arabic and Iberian equivalent of John or Yochanan.
Which carries the meaning of giver of life.
Right. They were the sons of life.
And they didn't just hoard their wealth, they used it to build massive institutional structures, like the Great Synagogue in Calatayud, Spain.
And Yahya had 5 sons. Those 5 sons seeded branches of the Ibn Yahya dynasty across Portugal, Castile, and Aragon.
The family tree just blossoms across the entire peninsula.
It really does. If we follow the direct line of our sources, we move through to his son Yosef, born around 1210, and then down to Yosef's son, Shlomo Hazakin.
Hazakin, meaning the elder or the sage, who did it in 1299. So they've reached the absolute highest echelons of Iberian power. But, you know, as we know from history, the higher you climb in a royal court, the bigger the target on your back becomes when the political winds shift.
Oh! Invariably.
And the Iberian Peninsula was becoming incredibly unstable, which forces a strategic pivot for a man named Gedaliah ben Shlomo ibn Yahya.
Gedaliah is an amazing character.
He really is. He was born around 1295, and he lived to be 90 years old, which means he actually survived the Black Death that wiped out roughly half of Europe.
And surviving the Black Death is remarkable on its own, but we have to look at how he survived. Gedaliah was a philosopher, but more importantly, he was a highly skilled court physician.
Which was incredibly lucrative back then.
Oh, absolutely. Medical knowledge at that time was one of the few things that granted you intimate personal access to the royal chambers.
Right.
Initially, he served King Ferdinand I of Portugal, but as political danger and anti-Jewish sentiment started rising in Portugal, Gedaliah used his status as a physician to seamlessly transition his family into Castile.
So he just jumps borders.
Yeah, escaping the chaos and offering his medical services to King Henry II of Castile instead.
So he uses his medical expertise as a literal passport to safety. But here is where the story takes a turn that sounds completely fictional.
Like out of a novel.
Totally. Gedaliah had a daughter named Yonati, but she was known in Spanish as Paloma, which means dove. The sources describe her as both beautiful and incredibly intelligent. And Paloma enters into a deeply significant relationship with a man named Don Frederic Alfonso de Castilla.
We really need to contextualize who Don Frederic was. He was the first Lord of Haro, a royal prince, and the illegitimate son of King Alfonso the Eldest of Castile.
So he was a major deal.
A major, powerful player in the royal court. Ultimately a tragic one, since he was later murdered by his half-brother, King Peter the Cruel.
Wow. And because Paloma was Jewish, and Don Frederic was Christian royalty, they could not legally marry under the laws of the time.
Right, it was strictly forbidden.
But they had a son together, Alonso Enriquez, who would go on to become the Admiral of Castile. This union birthed the House of Enriquez.
It literally injected the ancient Babylonian Davidic bloodline directly into the veins of Spanish royalty.
So what does this all mean? I mean, how much of this was a genuine star-crossed romance, and how much was a calculated survival mechanism for a Jewish family navigating an incredibly dangerous royal court?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the mechanism of illegitimate royal children in medieval Europe.
Okay, how did that work?
Well, an illegitimate child wasn't just a mark of shame. It was a highly leveraged political asset. Gedaliah needed extreme tact to keep his family alive as the religious climate grew darker.
And having a royal grandchild helps with that.
Tremendously. By having a grandson who was a recognized part of the royal bloodline, even illegitimately, the Aben Yahya family gained untouchable proxy power.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, Alonso Enriquez couldn't inherit the throne, but as Admiral of Castile, he controlled the navy. That gave the Jewish side of his family a massive, unspoken insurance policy. They survived by weaving their own DNA into the very royal power structures that were threatening them.
The ultimate insurance policy.
Exactly.
But the irony is that those same power structures would eventually turn against them anyway.
Tragically, yes.
The immense power of the Aben Yahya and the Enriquez lines, who, by the way, married into other major noble houses like the Ramirez de Arellano family, all of it eventually collides with the terrifying machinery of the Spanish Inquisition.
In 1492 in Spain and 1497 in Portugal, the edicts of expulsion were issued.
And those were brutal.
The royal decree was incredibly brutal and clear. Convert to Christianity, leave the peninsula, and forfeit all your wealth or face execution.
This is where the family fractures. Those who stayed in Iberia, or those who eventually fled to the Spanish colonies, were forced to convert.
Right.
They became known as conversos, New Christians, or anusim, which translates to the forced ones. And to survive the prying bureaucratic eyes of the Inquisition, they had to completely bury their royal Babylonian roots.
They didn't just hide, though.
No, they actively adopted the most common Spanish surnames they could find. Names like Garcia, Martinez, and Torres.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that hiding, actually, because they used anonymity as a bureaucratic shield.
How so?
Well, the Inquisition was essentially a massive data collection agency. They tracked lineages to root out secret Jews. But if you adopt the same last name as 10,000 other peasant farmers?
You flood their ledger system.
Exactly. The inquisitors have a much harder time tracing your specific bloodline back to the chief rabbi of Portugal or the Exilarchs of Babylon when your name is suddenly just Garcia.
It was brilliant administrative camouflage.
It was.
And it worked so well that generations later, descendants of these hidden conversos crossed the ocean entirely.
Right.
They settled in Caribbean towns like San Germán and Yauco in Puerto Rico.
Right.
They lived their lives, leaving a quiet, mundane paper trail in Catholic marriage ledgers.
I mean, think about that for a second.
Really?
Imagine looking at your own driver's license today, seeing a completely common last name, and suddenly realizing it is actually a 500-year-old shield designed to hide a Babylonian royal lineage from an executioner. This raises an important question, though, about administrative erasure versus historical reclamation.
What do you mean?
For centuries, the administrative systems of the Inquisition forced a false, flattened identity onto this family just so they could survive. And today, our modern databases do something similar.
Right. Trying to limit our complex identities with character limits and standardized forms.
Exactly. But the sources highlight a beautiful moment of reclamation. A modern descendant of this line legally changed his name to Mateo Aben Garcia y Martinez de Matos.
And that specific name change is so powerful when you break it down. Aben means son of, explicitly honoring the ancient Aben Yahya line.
While the Garcia and the Martinez de Matos anchors him directly to those physical survival archives in Yauco, Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Reclaiming a name like that is a profound act of defiance. It's a way of forcing the modern standardized world to make physical room on its forms for a 1,000-year history that simply refused to be erased by the Inquisition.
It's been an unbelievable journey. I mean, we started on the banks of the Euphrates with a mathematical genius and a direct descendant of King David. We traveled through the shifting borders of the Reconquista, watching a Babylonian scholar act as an operating system for Templar knights.
An incredible pivot.
We witnessed the strategic birth of the House of Enriquez, the terrifying bureaucratic camouflage of the Inquisition, and finally, the quiet shores of Puerto Rico where those ancient names waited patiently in dusty Catholic ledgers to be spoken again. History isn't just a list of dates to memorize.
No, it's a living, breathing river of survival and constant adaptation. Every single generation in this lineage had to figure out a new mechanism to adapt.
Right.
Whether that meant mastering new geometric languages to map borders, using medical knowledge to access a king's inner sanctum during a plague, or adopting an entirely fake name just to survive to the next morning.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to take away from this deep dive. If an ancient royal Babylonian bloodline could be perfectly, flawlessly camouflaged inside incredibly common names like Garcia or Martinez, purely to survive the Inquisition, what hidden histories might be buried in your daily administrative labels?
It really makes you wonder.
It does. How much of what we consider to be our mundane modern identity, the name on your mail, the origin you take for granted on a daily basis, is actually just an ancient survival tactic that worked a little too well? Next time you fill out a form or look at an old family photograph, ask yourself what unseen, highly strategic history might be stretching out right behind it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the past.